And,
Thank
you know,
you.
I really applaud you just for my little stance here, but to have that information at our fingertips, to know that it is trustworthy information, is the biggest thing. And to, you know, to be able to know what questions to ask, where to go, and to take ownership of our own health is such an important thing.
And I think to know that you're not alone as well,
Yeah,
you know, because it has
totally.
been something that hasn't been spoken about for so long. You know, for various reasons, there is an incredible amount of stigma attached to it still, particularly in the workplace. And I think that to know that you're not alone is really important.
Welcome to Midlife Unraveled, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the twists and turns of midlife. I'm your host, Anita Gilbert, and I've transitioned from the corporate world of investment banking to become the proud owner of a yoga and Pilates studio. Together, we're going to navigate the exhilarating roller coaster that is midlife. Each episode, we dive deep with a seasoned expert to rediscover and redefine how to live our best during this life-changing period. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes, brimming with wisdom, insights, inspiration, and a laugh along the way. So strap in, because Midlife Unraveled is about to redefine the way you embrace midlife. Subscribe today and take this journey with us.
Our guest today, Sonya Lovell, is an advocate for challenging societal stigmas and for promoting better education and resources for all people as they transition through menopause. Sonya is the host of the popular podcast Dear Menopause, regularly interviewing leading local and global experts and commentators in the fields of women's health, mental health, and government. Experiencing an induced menopause as a result of treatment for breast cancer at the age of 47, Sonya found herself overwhelmed, unsupported and undereducated about menopause, struggling to understand what was happening to her rapidly changing health. Weathering a storm of symptoms, Sonya set off on a mission to understand everything she could about perimenopause and menopause. Initially, it was to help her feel healthy, stable, and happy again, but this quickly led to a career using her lived experience to support, educate, and raise awareness for all people who feel unsupported when it comes to menopause. And she certainly has done that. Sonya Lovell, I am so excited to welcome you to Midlife Unraveled.
Thank you, Anita. It is such a pleasure to be here today.
It is a real treat to chat to you. And we are talking today about medically induced early menopause. And this is a topic that may sound fairly complicated and unusual, but it is surprisingly common.
It is.
And that I'm really, really looking forward to getting nice and deep into this topic with you, Sonya. This was your own personal journey. And I'd love to start the conversation from before your cancer diagnosis. What did you know about menopause then?
Nothing. Like literally nothing.
Yeah.
So, and one of the reasons for that was my mother actually had a full hysterectomy when she was in her 20s. So, and that's back in the 70s. Okay. So yeah, no talk about menopause whatsoever in my family home. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, as we all know, it hasn't been up until recently something that was talked about amongst friends or even in the, you know, in the social zeitgeist.
No, it wasn't. It's just not out there, is it? It is now.
It is now. We've made sure of that.
I know, exactly. A lot of stomping of feet, I think. So no information. And take us back to that point where you were diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yeah, so that was a complete shock, as, you know, all breast cancer or any cancer diagnoses usually are.
Yeah.
I was 47. I was super fit. I was super healthy. I had been a personal trainer at that point for probably about 7 years.
Wow.
So yeah, I was the person that those things just didn't happen to. And I found a lump in my breast during the shower. During a shower, I had always done breast checks. It's I'm quite a regimented kind of follow the rules type of person.
Yeah.
except for when I'm pushing back against stigmas and taboos. And so I think I'd read somewhere in some women's health magazine that you should always check your breasts once a month when you are cycling, you know. So a good time to remember was like, I think I used to do it like the week after I'd had my period.
Yeah.
So I discovered a really tiny little lump that I'd not discovered before, and I ignored it.
Okay.
But only for a couple of months. It was like, it was really small, and I was like, that's interesting. Intriguing, but that was kind of as much, you know, headspace that I gave it.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, I felt it again, and I was like, oh, actually, I think that's bigger than it was. You know how you kind of like, I remember there was something there, but it doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
So I took myself off to my GP, and she was gorgeous. She was my family GP that I'd had for many, many, many years. And she was like, oh, Sonya, look, she goes, it's probably a cyst. Like, you know, I can feel it, but you know what? It feels like a cyst. And she was convinced that if she'd been allowed to, if she'd, you know, been able to pop a little needle into it then and there and pull out whatever fluid was inside it, that it would have been, I think she said green, which would have confirmed that it was a cyst. She goes, but, you know, we can't do that these days. So I'm going to send you off for a mammogram.
I think I'm actually quite comforted by that.
I know, right? I was like, which, are we in a third world country here or a first world? But anyway, so I went off for a mammogram, which very quickly also became an ultrasound, which very quickly on the same day, because we were heading into a public holiday, they made a call straight away to my GP and said, look, we have actually found something and we want to do a biopsy. Can we have your permission to do that today as well? So at one visit, pretty much, I ended up having mammogram, ultrasound, and a biopsy.
That's actually quite impressive, I have to say.
It was actually. It was a little bit like that was the beginning of feeling like I'd been pushed into a train carriage at a station that took off, and I had no idea where it was going, and it was picking up speed, and I was not in control anymore. So that was kind of pretty much the start of that experience.
Absolutely frightening.
Yeah, and you try and tell yourself that it's not, that, you know, I still tried to convince myself for the week leading up to getting the results that it was just a cyst. My GP had been so adamant. My husband was like, do you want me to come to the appointment? Because I had an appointment scheduled with my GP to get the results. And I was like, no, I'm fine. And then on the morning of the day, that was Friday, I went, you know what, actually, can you come with me? You know how you sort of start thinking, actually, I think I would like you there. And I'm so, so pleased that I had that change of heart, because he came with me to the appointment. She pretty much straight away went, Sonya, the results are back. You've got cancer. And it was blunt, but I think it also kind of needs to be, you know, it must be hard to deliver someone that news. And I guess there's the whole ripping off the Band-Aid kind of approach.
And the fact that she knew you as well, probably she knew that that's the approach you would respond. Yeah,
she knew me pretty well.
Like,
exactly.
You know, you don't want to fluff around the edges. If this is
you
the
don't
situation,
need to put the kid gloves on with me. It's like, this is what we've got. This is what we're dealing with. But what I experienced in that appointment, which is why I'm so pleased I took my husband with me, was it was like I entered a little bit of a tunnel, and everything kind of just started shutting down around me. And it's a trauma response, but I'd never experienced it before. And luckily my husband was there to ask questions that I literally couldn't kind of put enough thoughts together in my brain to ask.
Well, you're in shock.
Yeah, it's shock, it's trauma. It's, you know, it's that I'd convinced myself it wasn't one thing, and then it turned out that it was, and it's like, oh my God, I was wrong. So there was a lot going on. So that was pretty much how I got my diagnosis.
Wow. And then you went straight into treatment, presumably.
Yeah, I had a meeting with my breast surgeon, I think a week later, and I was on her operating table, I think another week after that.
Wow.
So yeah, they you know, the Australian medical system is great at some things, and treating breast cancer is actually one of the things we're really, really good at. We're I think the best in the world. And so, and I had a lumpectomy, or what they now call a breast conserving surgery. So that was where they just took the lump out to diagnose that. They also took some lymph nodes out. And then once you get the pathology back from that, your treatment beyond that is decided.
Did you have chemotherapy?
I did. I had everything. I had, so I had my surgery. I then had 12 weeks of chemotherapy. I think I did four rounds. And then I had radiotherapy after that. So in all, it was about 9 months of active treatment that I went through.
And what kind of condition were you in at the end of that treatment? How did you feel? Like, I can just imagine that you've been through so much, physically, emotionally. How do you feel at the end of all that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of the fallout comes a little bit later. Right. You can't, like, in my experience, I finished my treatment. We had, my kids were, in their teens at that time, still at school. We had charts on the wall crossing off the days until, my radiotherapy was finished, because that was the end of my treatment. And I kind of got to that and was like, okay, cool, I'm done. Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah. Like, we got through all of this. I can get on with my life now. Yeah. And society also puts a fair bit of pressure on you of, okay, well, you're finished now. You're done. You're cured. Like, okay, move on. What's next? And I am very much a doer. I go at 100 miles an hour pretty much 7 days a week. So I was really keen to get back into my life. And then the wheels started falling off probably about 12 months later.
Okay. Was that an emotional response, or were you physically that drained?
It was everything. It was triggered by the death of one of my good friend's husbands, and we had been diagnosed at the same time. So we were chemo buddies, and our two youngest boys were the same age, so that we were friends through school. And the boys were, I think they were 16 at the time, and we knew when we both got our diagnoses that I was going to survive and Nick wasn't, but you never know when that will be, and you always hope that there'll be some miracle and that won't be the outcome. But when he passed, I was really triggered into what they call survivor guilt. And so that was actually when I ended up in counselling. I hadn't had any counselling prior to that. And that was really what tipped me into really understanding the impact of everything that I'd been through in the last couple of years had on me physically, emotionally, mentally. I was a bit of a mess at that point.
Yeah, I can imagine that when you're going through your treatment, you're just looking for that next step. And you said you're very much a doer, so you're very much looking at, okay, what do I need to do next? What is happening next? It's very sort of almost clinical, the next treatment, the next appointment, the next this, the next that. But without taking that care to think actually how are you dealing with this emotionally, mentally, that's going to have a massive impact. But I suppose it gets almost shunted to the side, because at the time it's all treatment based. It's doing what needs to be done to get you through this situation.
Absolutely. And it's also where I've recognised, and I've had conversations with many people about this, there's actually a massive gap in care for cancer patients, and that is at that handover of active treatment finishing, and you get handed back to your GP basically. So during all of your treatments, you have this incredible multidisciplinary team that look after you. You have constant appointments, you're very cared for, as you just said, what the next step is. And then you kind of have your last appointment so for me, that was with my oncologist, and it was like, okay, cool. Well, I don't need to see you now for another 3 months. So I was on 3 monthly appointments with all of them for the first few years afterwards. So all your ongoing care now is handed back to your GP. And there's this real gap that so many people fall through at that point, because your GP hasn't really been involved in everything that's gone on for that period of treatment. They're not really across where your mental health is at. They're not really positioned to be supporting cancer patients right at the end of their active treatment. So there is a real lack of support and care that's kind of provided at that point.
Yeah. And that very much comes down to what your GP is like. You were lucky, obviously, you had a very nice GP who you knew, but for somebody who's, who like me just goes to the local medical centre, usually I see that doctor, but you can see different doctors at different times. You don't have that connection, and also there's no one telling them what their responsibilities are. You don't necessarily, they don't know what's required of them in order to support you. So if you don't know what to ask for, I can see this is just a huge divide.
It is, and I actually wasn't lucky because my GP retired whilst I was having my treatment.
Bad timing.
So very bad
Bring
timing.
her back.
I had words with her, but I was actually, and her clinic completely closed, so there was no handover to another family GP or anything like that. And because I'd been under the care of my multidisciplinary team, I knew that she'd retired, but I hadn't been proactive in finding a new GP. And so when I actually was handed over, I had no one to hand over to. But it is also indicative, as you say, of how our healthcare system has changed. Very few people now have long ongoing relationships with family GPs. We do very much tend to go to medical centres, and like you say, I might see this person or I might see that person, and so I fell through that gap, but that's where a lot of people fall through that gap as well.
And after you finish your treatment, obviously when you're undergoing your breast cancer treatment, the focus very much is on the breast cancer. After that, was there any talk of the fact that your treatment would throw you into early menopause, or was it ever mentioned? I suppose then it comes down to the role of the GP.
So first part of that question is, also the first part that I'll answer is, was there any talk of it? So yes, at my very first appointment with my oncologist, because it's the chemotherapy that throws you into medically induced menopause, and it will depend on how close you are in age to the natural age of menopause as to whether that's a permanent menopause or a temporary menopause that you experience. For me, I was 47. The average age of menopause for women in Australia is 51. So given I was very close to what would likely have been my normal menopause age, he was like, look, you will go into menopause. And that was my very first appointment with him. And
you're like, what is menopause?
No, I was like, oh, okay, cool. It was
no
just
idea
like,
what to expect.
Okay. No, there was no and that's going to mean, or any care provided throughout the my ongoing treatment and then my handover around my menopause. So yes, I had my very last period in between my surgery and my starting of my chemo, and then I never had a period again. And then when it had been 12 months since I'd had a period, my oncologist ran some blood tests. So they test for FSH, is the hormone that is the indicator of whether you are postmenopausal. And it confirmed that I was definitely postmenopausal. It wasn't a temporary menopause. Mine was permanent. But that was pretty much it. It was like, oh, okay, so you are in menopause now. Yeah, okay, cool. We've confirmed that. Good one. And then...
Any suggestions on how to treat it?
No. And it's really hard. I mean, you do have to acknowledge that there is a lot of unpicking that has to happen between what am I experiencing that is a result of having gone through 9 months of active treatment for breast cancer. So, chemo side effects, radiotherapy side effects, all of that sort of thing, versus what are menopause symptoms. And, the two can be fairly similar. The two are hard to pick apart, but what is frustrating is that nobody actually sits down with you and helps you pick apart that, so to put you into a position when you are finished all of your treatment and those symptoms start disappearing, that what you're left with, how to manage that.
So how did you go about this? Like, what did you do? Actually, before we get on to that, one question. When you go into a medically induced menopause, is it fast? Does it
instant.
Just hit? I was just going to say
it's
it
instant.
doesn't
surgical and
you miss
induced
perimenopause completely.
Yes. Well,
And-
okay, so that's a really interesting point. So perimenopause is the 10 years leading up to your menopause, which is one day in the calendar, right? So I would have been in my perimenopausal years, absolutely, but I was one of those women that was sailing through without any indication that I was.
Right.
So yeah, my periods were super stable. I wasn't experiencing hot flushes. I wasn't experiencing an impact on my sleep. My cognitive function was fine. So a lot of the things that women do start or can start to experience in perimenopause, I hadn't been experiencing. So it was absolutely not on my radar. So yes, anybody that experiences surgical menopause, which is when the ovaries are removed, or a medically induced menopause, it is instant. And there is research to show that the impact of that from a symptomology perspective is much more severe than those that experience a natural menopause.
Right. Okay. That is huge. What were your expectations of life post-treatment? So when you went into the treatment, did you have any expectations what it was going to be like afterwards?
No, you know what? I did not put any thought into it. And I don't know if that's because I was naive and I'm an optimistic person. And so I just assumed that this was like this little speed bump, and I was constantly being told that I'd got the good cancer. I was lucky that I'd got the good cancer, that, they were going to be able to treat it and I'd be fine afterwards. So that kind of creates, or for someone like me, that created a belief that I would just, I'd have to heal from surgery, obviously, and there'd be a toll from the chemo and the radiotherapy. But, once I'd mopped up all of that, I'd be back to my normal, bouncy, happy, healthy self. And it's actually far from what my experience was.
Right. And how did you, so you menopause hit you like a train. After
yeah, the train that I'd been put on, I then got off that train and then it ran me over.
Oh my God, it's crazy. So tell me describe that experience of going into menopause. How were your symptoms? Did you have very severe symptoms? How extreme was that for you?
Yeah, look, I had very extreme symptoms. And as I say, again, it does need to be kind of put into context of I was also undergoing chemo, so I was having side effects from my chemo. I was on all sorts of different drugs.
So you were, just to confirm, you were actually in menopause, experiencing menopause symptoms while you were in chemo?
Yeah, okay. That's right.
All right, so you had two trains.
Yes.
Not just one.
One was a freight train. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what makes it so difficult as well. And like going back to a point that you made earlier, from a medical perspective, my oncologist and I had this exact conversation with my oncologist. His one and only goal was to keep me alive and to cure the breast cancer, or to prevent a recurrence and all of those things. Their care and support around the fact that your body has also lost all of its, two of its most important hormones. One was declining anyway. At that point in time, really quickly, just doesn't kind of get the priority as keeping you alive does.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of. So you finished the chemo. Sorta. Yeah. So you finished the chemotherapy. You're still experiencing, obviously very, very severe menopause symptoms. The post-chemotherapy symptoms have kind of leveled off. So now that you're left with symptoms of menopause. What sort of symptoms were you experiencing?
Oh gosh, so many. I had extreme joint pain. So as I'd mentioned earlier, I'd been a personal trainer for a very long time. I trained right through all of my chemo and my radiotherapy as best as I could, because I knew how good that was going to be for me from a mental health perspective, from a longevity perspective, and a recovery perspective. But I got to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. I had to, before I could put my feet on the ground to weight bear, I had to do all of these exercises of rotations of my ankles and flex my feet, because the pain would be so immense as soon as I went to weight bear. My husband and I had a running joke. We lived in a house at the time that had stairs. We were on the top of the level of the house, and to exit the house you had to go down the stairs. And I said, I really hope we don't have a fire during the night, because I literally would not be able to jump out of bed and run down the stairs. I used to go down our stairs.
Fire! I've got to do exercise.
Exactly. I'd be going out one of the windows instead. I'd be like ninjaing off a window. And I had to then walk down the stairs sideways, so I couldn't walk frontways down. So I had a lot of joint pain.
See, that joint pain is one that people don't usually talk about. We hear the other common symptoms, but we don't really focus on joint pain. I feel like that one that it kind of like falls under the radar of many people.
Yeah, it's being talked about a lot now. There's just been a study done in America, and they've actually coined a term called musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, which focuses on joint pain, on a lot of inflammation can occur. So estrogen is a great anti-inflammation agent in the body. Yeah. So when we start losing that estrogen, our inflammation levels can rise. So frozen shoulder, plantar fasciitis, a lot of those conditions that you see really commonly in people in their midlife are a result of those hormone fluctuations starting to change. So that is actually starting to be acknowledged. And I know a shoulder surgeon on the Northern Beaches in Sydney who, if he gets a middle-aged woman come in with frozen shoulder, will put her onto HRT before he does surgery. So
wow.
There is some great research and evidence starting to come out around that.
I didn't actually realise that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So luckily I didn't get any of the, frozen shoulder or anything like that, but I definitely had joint pain. Cognitive function for me was huge. I lost a lot of it, particularly my ability to remember words and hold a conversation. Yeah. So as you can tell, I like to talk. I'm always considered myself to be, great with language and holding constructive conversations. I was losing 3 or 4 words every sentence, and it is the most frustrating thing I've ever experienced. That I got ocular migraines, which are the weirdest experience ever. And I started.
Please explain.
So it's like one eye, the vision would get almost like a kaleidoscope. When you look through a kaleidoscope and you get that distorted pyramid-y kind of view. So one eye will just suddenly, like I've had it when I've been watching television, I've had it when I've been working on my computer, the vision out of that eye literally just starts moving and kind of shimmying around, and it's like you're looking through a kaleidoscope. And it lasts about 20 minutes or so, and then it just suddenly clears and it's gone. Oh my God,
you must feel just sick. Like it must just make you feel quite almost
seasick. No, I actually got that's what I found weird about it. I got no physical symptoms with it other than this distortion of my vision. So that's actually called an ocular migraine. It's one of the weird and wonderful ones that not many people experience.
Wow. No, I think the first time I've even heard ocular migraines. Oh my goodness.
What else did I get? Hot flushes were horrendous. I stopped drinking alcohol because I realised that I was getting hot flushes that were bad anyway. But if I drank particularly white wine, I would literally have one sip and my body would just burn up from the inside. So that was a good time for me to stop drinking. Yeah. Night sweats, horrendous night sweats where I would wake up absolutely saturated and I would have to wake my husband up because I needed to change the sheets. Like I had sweat through the entire bedding as well as obviously my pajamas and everything. And that's really, that then disrupts his sleep. It's embarrassing to have to wake up and go, hey honey, can you get out because I've got to change the sheets. Where else? Look, I had a lot. They're the worst of what I kind of experienced.
But then how you're not functioning on a day-to-day level because you are experiencing these symptoms, but, to couple that, you're not getting much sleep. So, and that is kind of underpinning everything else. Apart from the fact your cognitive function is affected, but, the sleep, just that in itself would have an impact on cognitive function as well.
And it's a spiral. You know, when you're not sleeping, then, you know, your mood becomes impacted. Your cognitive function is obviously impacted as well. You become grumpy and irritable and quick to anger. So, you know, they are all interrelated. I lost my ability to sleep a full night pretty much from the day that I got my diagnosis. Right. So obviously the day you get the diagnosis, it's, you know, that trauma shock kind of response. But then with the treatments and the menopause, where are we now? I'm 7 years post-diagnosis now, and I only started sleeping again in the last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Like sleeping properly for a full through the night without waking. It was quite difficult.
Wow. And what was your experience then? Obviously you went to the GP, you've got these horrendous menopause symptoms. I have a feeling this is not going to be positive.
No, sadly it's not. So the best thing that I did was I became my own detective. You know, look, I'm lucky to have a very scientifically based brain. I love research. I've worked in women's health and fitness for many, many, many years. You know, prior to being a personal trainer, I'd studied naturopathy. So I'd always, you know, I had the ability to read and understand medical literature and research studies and things like that. So I pretty much became my own detective and started looking into why I was experiencing what I was experiencing, what I could do. I also fell into a tricky space where I was denied point blank any HRT or MHT because of the hormone drivers of my cancer. Okay. That has since changed for various reasons. But at the time, that was what I was told, and that was what I believed was to be true.
Is that the advice has changed, or that your personal situation has changed?
Both, but the advice hasn't changed enough for it to have trickled down into any of the guidelines. So many, many, many women that have been in my situation today will still be denied hormone therapy if their cancer has particular hormone receptors, their tumours. Okay. It takes a whole lot of research and advocacy and fighting tooth and nail, basically, if you choose that you want to go down that path, which not everybody does. But I did, and it has been an absolute game changer for me.
Right. Okay, so you're doing your research.
So I'm doing my research.
What have you found out?
So I discovered this thing called perimenopause, and I discovered that I didn't really get the opportunity to experience that properly. And I also discovered what all the symptoms of menopause were, and that, you know, how you could manage those, which were mostly all the ways I'd been denied. And there are lifestyle factors, you know, but I was ticking all of those boxes already. You know, exercise is huge, particularly strength and resistance training, which, you know, is something I've been a huge advocate for anyway. You know, I'd stopped drinking. Healthy eating has always been something I've been big on. So, you know, I ticked a lot of the lifestyle boxes naturally, but then anything outside of that I was getting a lot of pushback about. But what the big thing that happened for me was I went back to work and I started training women again. And I made a really conscious, because I'd shut my business down for about 3 years. I made a really conscious decision when I went back that I was only going to train women from about 35, 40 onwards.
Okay.
Whereas before I'd just trained anybody that had come to me. And what I started realizing, now this is all gets kind of a little bit tied in with COVID as well. So I was running my business out of my garage at home, and I was running really small classes. So I was running classes of about 4 or 5 women in a really small space. And you can imagine the conversations that we ended up having, you know, as we all got to know each other. But what I started realizing was that there was a really common thread through a lot of their complaints and their health concerns that I recognized, because of the research that I'd done on myself, was actually them starting to experience perimenopausal symptoms, or for some of them it was their menopausal, postmenopausal symptoms. Right. And so where I'd initially done my kind of detective work looking at it all through my lens, I started to look at it through the lens of someone that was going to go through a natural menopause, and realized that with education and awareness and the right support, they could actually, you know, do a lot to help themselves when they knew what was going on. So I kind of became this, educator for them around, well, you're saying this is what I think is happening. Go and talk to your GP, ask them if they believe that it's the same thing. I got a lot of resources off the Australasian Menopausal Society website. I was passing those around to anybody that would listen. And then from there, I decided to launch my podcast. And that was pretty much the full transition for me into speaking in this space as often as I could get the chance to.
And knowledge is power. So for these women to have the information and the benefits of your, hours and hours and hours of research and trawling through different papers, and to be able to put that into a nice, succinct way for people to understand very clearly and easily is a huge benefit. And that's, your podcast is fantastic and has really bridged the gap for so many women to be able to go and fight and educate themselves about what's going on, because I feel that there's a massive, massive gap. I was reading, it was on one of these Facebook groups or something, a woman was sharing that she'd actually gone to her GP and he'd said there's no such thing as menopause. Like,
whoa, well, he actually
GP.
needs to be...
It was a female GP.
And this is really interesting because often I get people go, oh, it must be the male GPs. I'm like, actually, no, it's not. No. It's not. It's all GPs. There's a very broad stroke we can brush here.
Yeah.
Well, it's not all. That's unfair. It is a lot of GPs. And there's a lot of reasons for why this has happened and why it exists as a bit of a big black hole. But that GP really needs to be... dubbed into the Australian Medical Association, because that is malpractice. Yeah,
exactly. But I feel like, when I've heard, and no disrespect to the GPs out there, but you can't be across everything. And I understand in the training that, menopause is such a small little piece of that.
It's an opt-in if it's included. So it's an opt-in. There is one in Victoria. We actually do have... and this is where I get really frustrated with Australia, because we're broken up into all these states and there's no federal overview of things.
Yeah.
But Victoria has actually mandated the inclusion of midlife women's health, so particularly perimenopause, menopause, postmenopausal care, into their GP's undergraduate degree. Great. But they are the only state in Australia that has done that.
Wow. Okay. So there's a bit of an opportunity there for
huge
for more
opportunity.
Information.
Yeah.
And so you started the podcast. You speak a lot for different groups. You're a huge advocate in this space and somebody who's very, very knowledgeable and very, very well respected. How did this then change? You very much changed careers. And talk to me about that taking the step from being a PT, so you don't work as a PT anymore, I understand.
No, I retired at the end of last year. So it was a gradual transition, I guess, for a number. So I ended up moving out of my garage gym and actually rented a space and ran a boutique PT studio for, I think, a year. I had it in a proper official space.
Yeah.
But I was multitasking during that. I was running the podcast. I was starting to get a lot more speaking and writing opportunities. I have a hilarious story of where one morning I had finished with PTs the night before, my personal training sessions the night before at like about 8 o'clock at night, gone home, gone to, had dinner, gone to bed kind of thing, because I had a 6:30 class to teach the next morning. Happened to check my, was waiting for my 6:30 a.m. clients to arrive, happened to check my messages on my phone, and there was across all of my platforms, like in LinkedIn, in Instagram, in all my emails, was this producer reaching out to me from one of the breakfast TV shows saying, we want you on the show this morning.
Oh and my God.
I was like, it was like 5 minutes before my clients were due to walk into the gym. So I'm quickly, she had actually left her mobile number, so I really quickly called her.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, I've just got your messages. This is my situation. What time? Where do I have to be? And she was like, okay. So she gave me the time. She was like, oh, can you come into the studio? And I was like, I literally can't, because I will finish teaching a class. I think I finished teaching a class at like 8 a.m. and they wanted me on at 8:30 a.m. or something. And so I was like, but can we do it by Zoom? Like, I will go home, I'll make myself look beautiful, and I'll be on. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
But it was chaos. I was like,
I can imagine.
And, and then I was like, am I being fair to my PT clients when I'm, mentally I'm preparing for this television interview, but I'm also teaching them. So that was kind of the trigger.
But you taught the class, you didn't leave them hanging.
I did. No, I didn't.
That's professionalism. I love it.
And I needed an income. So that was kind of the trigger after I had that experience where it was like, actually, I need to really properly transition out of this career. I think I'm done here. I've done everything I can. I'm happy with what I've achieved, everything I could have imagined as a personal trainer. And there's this door wide open for me now that I want to walk through and see what is there for life beyond that.
Yeah, and to have that opportunity, I feel like these things come to you at a certain time, and I think that to take that opportunity and actually, move into that next phase is hugely empowering for so many women. For us to have you there is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
So, with the benefit of hindsight now, what questions would you have asked that would have made a difference? When you look back now and you think, well, actually, questions that you could have asked to change the outcome for you.
Absolutely. So, at that point in the oncologist's appointment, when they say, and as a result, you'll go through menopause, I would have stopped at that point and said, okay, and tell me what that means. Okay, what does going into menopause actually mean for me long term? Okay, I understand it means my periods will stop, but what else does it mean?
Yeah.
And then and asked for a proper explanation around that. And then, as a result of that, gone into okay, so who's going to support me through that? Where am I going to get my information? Who is my contact person here when I'm struggling with that? That person doesn't exist right now. We get breast care nurses who are amazing, but they're not trained to also look after the menopause side of things as well.
Right. Okay. So there's very much an opportunity there.
Yeah, I'm working on that one. Don't let anyone steal that idea.
What short-term and long-term changes do you feel like we need to implement to make sure women have a better experience?
Yeah, look, great question. The very first one, if we take the lens of the medical and the surgically induced menopause, then, I'm fiercely advocating to Parliament at the moment to include in their report that comes down from the Senate inquiry in mid-September that there is a provision made available for nurses to become menopause specialist nurses, and we could see them placed across, GP clinics. We could see them in the hospital settings. We could see them working alongside multidisciplinary teams with cancer or preventative surgery patients, so that they're there to support them specifically just on their menopause and to advocate for them in their multidisciplinary team meetings and to check in with them long after they've been handed over to maintain that contact. It can just be a call once a month. How are you going? What have you noticed? What's changed? What are you struggling with right now? Somebody to just be that point of contact that's just related to your menopause and your ongoing health outside of the treatment bubble.
That's fantastic.
It does, doesn't it?
It really does. I think just that really much bridges the gap for and covers a lot of the bases where you found things fell apart and it didn't work for you.
That's right.
Are there any other countries that do this well?
Yeah, there is. I did some research actually when I was putting my submission into the Senate inquiry and proposing this, and I think it was the UK have an actual menopause specialist nurse stream that nurses can choose to take, because I'm pretty sure that I included that as an attachment with my my submission. Yeah. So it was like, here's an example of someone that's actually doing that really well. So that was the one example that I came across. So they do exist, and I'm sure that there are other countries that would be doing this a whole lot better than we are right now.
Yeah, exactly. So there's huge opportunity there. So we're going to wrap this up now. This has been massively educational for me as well, and I'm sure for everybody listening. What are 3 takeaways that you can recommend that will really make a difference in people's lives?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one is be your own advocate. Like, don't just accept being told something, no matter who it is that tells you, however high a pedestal you put them on because they're a GP or they're a oncologist or they're a surgeon. If something doesn't feel right with you in your gut, that you're perhaps being misled or you're being dismissed, stand up for yourself, ask questions, push back, or go get a second opinion. We really have to be our own advocates here. If you have the literacy to do your own research, and when I say literacy, I mean the ability to understand medical research and information. Like, not everybody's brain is wired that way. Then do your own research. Unfortunately, I hate that we are in this position where we have to do our own research, but it is what it is right now while we wait for change to come through. So do your own research, be your own advocate. And the other thing, can I
just ask you a question on that? Okay, people say doing their own research. How do you know what to trust? Like, you put it into you put it into Google, and how do you know what is something that
and it's not just Google these days
correct?
Either. Like, social media platforms, particularly Instagram, TikTok, are causing a lot of confusion in the space for people that are looking for information, because there's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of hardcore beliefs out there that are being kind of forced into, you're told, don't listen to this person because they don't have your best interests at heart, or they're using old research, and we don't know what to trust anymore, unfortunately. I think the biggest advice I'd give there is every single country has its own menopause society. So in Australia, we have the Australasian Menopause Society. They actually bridge Australia and New Zealand, and they should be your leading voice on anything to do with menopause. So the Australasian Menopausal Society has a great website that is full of downloadable resources for both. Unfortunately, they use the term, and lots of people use the term, consumers, but that's the average patient. And they also have resources available for clinicians as well. They also run training courses for clinicians. So if your GP is not up to date, tell them to go and do a course. They get their CPD points for it. They get the extra knowledge. They can help other people. But yeah, the AMS is the first port of call for anyone in Australia or New Zealand.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I feel like it's so confusing out there. There are so many medical sites, and you think, okay, fine, I can trust this, but you can't. You don't really know. But that's fantastic to have a starting point and somewhere to land. What are the second and third takeaway that you can share with us?
So kind of linked, be prepared for any appointments that you're going to, and that is whether you're going to see your GP, or if, in my situation, as I mentioned, when I was seeing my oncologist, be as prepared as you can for those appointments. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I give anyone that's in their perimenopausal years is to actually keep a diary. And it doesn't have to be something that you keep for months and months and months. It might just be 1 month's worth of data. But note what you're experiencing. So if your period is different from 1 month to the next, write down what about it was different, because we forget so quickly. Yeah, we're all so busy. Are you having hot flushes? If so, how often? And, have you been able to draw a pattern between, for me, I found alcohol was a huge trigger. Yeah. Cognitive function, anything weird and wonderful suddenly that you've never experienced before, itchy skin, burning tongue, burning lips, all of those, all sorts of weird and wonderful things can happen, and just jot them down, and then go pre-armed to your appointment. Book a long appointment first off with your GP, because a standard appointment is 15 minutes, 12 minutes once you're in there, if you're lucky. And there is absolutely no way that a woman or anybody assigned female at birth that has had functioning ovaries can sit down for 12 minutes and describe everything that they're experiencing in their midlife years. Like, it's just not possible. So book a long appointment, go pre-armed with as much information as you can. Our GPs are amazing people at their core, and they just want to help. They do have lots of time constraints. They do have a lot of other areas they need to be across. But the other thing to remember also is they also need to eliminate that it's not something else that you're experiencing as well. So if you're going in with heavy flooding periods, which can be something that is experienced during perimenopause, it can also be an indication for other conditions that do need to be ruled out as well.
I love the fact that you say all the symptoms, because I once saw a list of menopause symptoms, and I was shocked to see some of the things I saw on there. And the whole list of symptoms is like 40 different symptoms or something crazy. So, like, you may be experiencing something and not have any idea that it's in any way, shape or form linked to menopause, but actually writing those things down means that you go in and you have information and you know how often things are happening and what's happening. And it gives your GP the information to be able to help you. If you just walk in and say, I'm having hot flushes, and they're obviously asking you different questions, but if you don't have the information to help them so they can help you, I feel like there's an onus on both sides. So we do also have a responsibility to, have gathered that information about what's happening in our own bodies, so we can present that to the GP, and they can actually, help us find a good outcome. So I think that's really, really good advice of yours. So I keep interrupting you with lots of questions.
That's okay. That's all good.
Now number 3.
Okay, number 3 is that you should be aware but not alarmed. And, look, it sounds a bit... Can I swear on your podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Great. It sounds a bit wanky, but there is a lot of people that feel that the conversation around perimenopause and menopause is actually scaring people because... not everybody's going to experience all of the symptoms. And that's absolutely true. The stats are that 100% of people born with fully functioning ovaries will experience menopause. 20% of those will cruise through and it literally won't be a blip on their radar. They'll lose their periods and that will be the end of it. Yeah. And that's fantastic for that 20% of people. 80% of the population will experience some or... they use this word that I really hate, but they say bothersome. I'm going to say mild to moderate. I know it literally just makes me so angry on the inside every time I hear it. But mild to moderate symptoms. And then 20% of those people will experience very severe debilitating symptoms that will impact their relationships, their ability to function at work, their ability to parent if they're a parent, and can have serious mental health issues. So yes, I firmly believe that we need to talk about all aspects of the perimenopausal and menopausal journey, but it doesn't mean that it's going to happen to you. Every single person's experience will be unique and different. And one of the best things about it when you get onto the other side of it is that life is actually really, really good.
Yeah.
There is this increase in confidence that comes. There is I say this, and now that I know I can swear, I can say this unashamedly. You run out of fucks to give. You really do. You stop caring about what other people think. You use your voice in ways that you may not have used it previously because you don't care anymore about what other people think.
Exactly.
Your
Would you have done a podcast 15 years ago?
I had actually previously done a podcast, so speaking for me is not a problem.
Okay, you are. So I'm like, no way. Even 3 years ago, forget it.
No, I would not have done television interviews, and I would not have gone to Parliament House and presented to politicians. There's a lot of things I wouldn't have done because I would have been worried about what other people thought of me, or I would have been second guessing, who am I to do this?
Yes.
Now I'm like, damn, I am the person, because if I don't do it, nobody else might do it. And women need to know this. People need to know this.
Exactly.
So there's some really, really good stuff that comes on the other side.
So I feel like we need to talk a lot about those sort of things as well, because I understand for younger women, it can be, oh my God, there's all this talk about menopause and it's all dreadful and it's all awful. And, it doesn't have to be like that. But this is, when you talk about, 20% of women having severe symptoms, this is a lot of women. This is a lot of people who are really, finding that their day-to-day, they cannot function, and the impact that is having on your relationships around you. This is huge. Like the fallout from that can be so detrimental. It's
Absolutely.
incredible. So
it's 20% of 51% of the population.
Yeah, which is huge. And again, that 20% that's who are experiencing no symptoms at all, that's, great, happy for you, kind of, sort of. But no, I genuinely am a little bit envious, but yes. But what you're doing Sonya, is making such a difference. And
Thank you.
I really applaud you just for my little stance here, but on the behalf of so many women, and you are so outspoken in such a beautiful way to help women be informed, make informed decisions. And like I said before, knowledge really is power. And I feel like at this age, to be empowered and to have that information at our fingertips, to know that it is trustworthy information, is the biggest thing. And to be able to know what questions to ask, where to go, and to take ownership of our own health is such an important thing.
And I think to know that you're not alone as well, because it has been something that hasn't been spoken about for so long. For various reasons, there is an incredible amount of stigma attached to it still, particularly in the workplace. There is a taboo in speaking about it even within our own families. So there are, I think, a lot of people that have had difficult experiences and felt very alone. And I think that to know that you're not alone is really important.
Yeah. And there's a safe space to ask questions as well. So a lot of people must have a lot of, there are a lot of Facebook groups to join that people can information that people can tap into, and just that shared experience is a huge support. I think definitely. So thank you so much, Sonya. It's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for hours.
Hence why I had my own podcast. Thank you, Anita. Thank you so much for shining a light on this within your own podcast, for starting, these conversations, and for inviting me along today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Sonya.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe so you can stay updated with more from Midlife Unravelled. To see more Midlife Unravelled, follow us at midlifeunravelled.com or at Midlife Unravelled on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you soon.